The American West, in the latter half of the 19th century, was a crucible. It was a land of stark beauty and brutal hardship, where fortunes were won and lost with the turn of a card or the vagaries of the weather. It was a place that tested the very mettle of the human spirit, drawing in those seeking opportunity, escape, or simply a patch of land to call their own. But for many, the promise of the West was often overshadowed by the harsh realities of isolation, the constant struggle for survival, and the ingrained prejudices that festered in small, isolated communities. It was into this unforgiving landscape, a tapestry woven with threads of hope and despair, that Elara arrived in the dusty, forgotten settlement of Red Creek. She wasn't a pioneer woman with a wagon full of dreams, nor a hardened traveler seasoned by years on the trail. Instead, she appeared like a phantom limb of a life violently severed, her presence as quiet and unassuming as the dust that perpetually coated the rough-hewn buildings of the town. Each weary step she took on the sun-baked earth leading into Red Creek was a testament to a journey that transcended mere miles. It was a slow, agonizing retreat from a past so painful it had seemingly stolen her voice, leaving behind only a hollow echo of the woman she once was. The silence that clung to her was more than just the absence of sound, it was a heavy, suffocating shroud woven from the raw threads of grief, the isolating weight of loss, and the profound weariness of a soul adrift in a world that suddenly felt alien and hostile. The inhabitants of Red Creek, their own lives a relentless battle against the unforgiving elements and the ever-present specter of misfortune, were a people whose resilience had often manifested as a hard, unyielding exterior. They viewed newcomers with a suspicion born of bitter experience, their eyes narrowed and assessing, their hearts guarded against the potential for further hardship. Elara, with her faded clothes and the unmistakable aura of recent tragedy, triggered not empathy or a sense of shared humanity, but a primal wariness, a deep-seated fear of the unknown. In their minds, shaped by the superstitions that often took root in isolated communities and the constant struggle to maintain their own precarious foothold, she wasn't a fellow traveler seeking solace, but a tangible embodiment of ill fortune, a dark cloud that threatened to cast a shadow over their already precarious existence. Whispers, like insidious tendrils, began to snake through the dusty streets, fueled by speculation and fear, tales of a husband lost to a senseless accident, a life seemingly marked by a cruel and relentless fate. Each day in Red Creek unfolded as a series of subtle, yet persistent acts of ostracization for Elara. The deliberate avoidance of eye contact in the crowded general store, the muttered slurs that followed her like unwanted companions, the casual acts of disrespect that chipped away at her already eroded sense of self-worth. Each incident was a fresh wound, a stark and constant reminder of her unwelcome status in this small, unforgiving world. Yet, Elara met their animosity not with anger or defiance, but with a stoic silence that was not born of weakness, but of a profound and weary resignation, a quiet refusal to expend what little energy she had left on a battle she instinctively knew she could not win. Her dilapidated shack on the very edge of town, a skeletal structure that seemed to groan under the weight of the wind and the relentless sun, became her only sanctuary. Within its crumbling walls, amidst the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light that pierced the gaps in the wood, she eked out a meager existence, her hands, once perhaps accustomed to the gentle touch of a loved one, now roughened and calloused from the unending cycle of back-breaking labor, scrubbing floors in exchange for meager meals, hauling buckets of water that seemed to weigh a ton, accepting any task, no matter how demeaning, for the few precious coins that represented the fragile line between survival and utter destitution. The pervasive atmosphere of mistrust that clung to Red Creek like the dust itself was a constant reminder of her isolation, a heavy burden she carried with every weary step. But even in the most desolate corners of the human experience, where hope appears as a faint and flickering star in an endless night, the inherent resilience of the human spirit can sometimes find an unexpected anchor. One sweltering afternoon, as the heat shimmered above the parched earth of Red Creek, distorting the already stark and unforgiving reality of the town, Elara's quiet dignity, the unwavering integrity with which she approached even the most menial and degrading tasks, caught the keen and observant eye of Caleb Thorne. Caleb Thorne was a man who seemed to have been hewn from the very landscape he commanded. His sprawling ranch, a testament to years of relentless toil, shrewd decision-making, and an almost primal understanding of the land, stretched across the rolling hills surrounding Red Creek like a self-contained kingdom. He was a figure whose life bore the deep and indelible scars of profound loss, a sorrow that had etched lines of quiet contemplation around his piercing blue eyes and instilled in him a profound and often unspoken understanding of the vagaries of human suffering. Though his considerable wealth and respected standing often kept him somewhat removed from the petty squabbles and deeply ingrained prejudices of Red Creek, Caleb possessed an innate and unyielding sense of justice, a moral compass honed by the stark realities and the often brutal solitude of his life on the open range. From his infrequent but necessary visits to town for essential supplies and business dealings, he had become a silent witness to the quiet suffering of Elara, observing the casual cruelty inflicted upon her and the almost ritualistic way in which she was ostracized by the community. He saw not the ill omen that the fearful townsfolk whispered about in hushed tones, but a quiet strength, a flicker of unyielding resilience in the face of relentless adversity, a quality that resonated deeply within him, perhaps echoing his own battles with loss and the inherent harshness of existence on the frontier. Caleb was not a man given to impulsive acts or fleeting displays of sentimentality. His decisions were typically weighed with a careful and deliberate pragmatism, a logical assessment of needs and potential consequences. Yet, the persistent image of Elara, bearing her heavy burdens with a silent grace that belied the profound hardship she endured, had begun to stir something within him, a sense of quiet obligation, perhaps, or a nascent recognition of a shared human experience that transcended the narrow-minded judgment of the community. One particularly brutal afternoon, after witnessing an act of gratuitous cruelty directed at Elara that left her visibly shaken and physically bruised, Caleb made a decision that would irrevocably alter the intertwined destinies of both their lives. He approached her not with comforting words or empty promises of solace, but with the direct, unvarnished pragmatism that defined his every interaction. He needed a wife, he stated, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to carry the weight of the land itself, and he had grown weary of the often superficial and ultimately unsatisfying prospects within the limited social circles of the territory. He offered Elara a stark and unconventional proposition, devoid of any pretense of romance or sentimental affection: agree to become his wife, and she would never again have to endure the bitter scorn and the physical pain inflicted by the inhabitants of Red Creek. Elara, her face pale and etched with a weariness that seemed to seep from the very marrow of her bones, looked up at him, her eyes, though clouded with recent suffering, searching his weathered features for any flicker of deceit or malice. The offer was so utterly unexpected, so completely removed from the grim reality of her daily existence, that it took a long moment for its full weight to truly register. A hesitant nod, almost imperceptible, a silent acknowledgment of a lifeline thrown into her abyss of despair, was her only reply. The transaction was swift and devoid of any semblance of traditional courtship or romantic overture. A quiet exchange of simple vows under the vast, indifferent expanse of the western sky, witnessed only by the silent, watchful hills that formed the distant horizon. Elara, the shunned widow of Red Creek, became the unlikely and perhaps bewildered bride of the prosperous rancher, Caleb Thorne. The journey to the Thorne ranch was a profound study in the unspoken. The rhythmic creak of the sturdy wagon, the steady and unwavering cadence of the horse's hooves on the dusty, winding trail, and the constant whisper of the wind through the tall, swaying prairie grass were their only companions on the long passage across the sprawling and often desolate landscape. The sheer vastness of the open territory seemed to amplify the myriad unspoken uncertainties that filled the space between them, creating a palpable tension that neither dared to breach. The ranch house, a solid and imposing structure built from the very materials of the land itself, rough-hewn timber and locally quarried stone, stood as a stark and silent testament to Caleb's years of relentless labor and hard-won success, a world removed from the squalid confines and constant threat of Elara's former existence in the dusty heart of Red Creek. Yet, within the sturdy walls of the ranch house, a different kind of silence settled, a cautious and tentative dance of two wounded souls bound together by circumstance rather than affection, each carrying the weight of their own individual tragedies. Caleb did not touch her that night, nor for the many weeks that followed. Theirs was a marriage born not from the passionate bloom of love, but from the parched earth of mutual need, a silent and unspoken agreement forged in the shared dust of hardship and a yearning for a fragile semblance of peace in a world that often offered little respite. Caleb's days unfolded in a predictable rhythm dictated by the unyielding cycle of nature, from the first pale light of dawn until the last fiery hues of sunset painted the western sky. He worked his sprawling land with a quiet intensity, a man whose truest communication with the world often came through the sweat that beaded on his brow and the calloused strength of his hands as he toiled under the vast expanse of the sky. His interactions with Elara were marked by a reserved courtesy, a polite and somewhat formal distance that spoke volumes about the unconventional nature of their union. Yet, in his own taciturn and undemonstrative way, he offered her a sanctuary, a refuge where the constant sting of judgment and the ever-present threat of cruelty no longer held sway over her weary spirit. The beating ceased. The scornful glances and the muttered insults that had been her daily bread in Red Creek were replaced by a respectful, if often bewildered, silence from the few townsfolk they occasionally encountered. He ensured her basic needs were met with a quiet efficiency, providing sturdy shelter, nourishing food, and a sense of security she had not known since the cruel hand of fate had first darkened her door. He might leave a bucket of fresh water and a clean cloth by her bedside, or quietly place a pair of well-worn but sturdy gloves near her work boots, small, unspoken gestures of care that hinted at a deeper humanity beneath his stoic exterior. Slowly, tentatively, Elara began the arduous and often painful process of navigating this new and unexpected reality, finding a fragile sense of stability in the predictable rhythm of life on the ranch. The vast, open landscape that had once mirrored her own sense of isolation now offered a different kind of solace, a sense of boundless space where the suffocating echoes of her past seemed to gradually soften and fade into the whispering winds. Caleb, in his quiet, undemonstrative way, had created a space where healing, though slow and undoubtedly arduous, could finally begin to take root in the parched soil of her wounded soul. Theirs was an unlikely and unconventional partnership, a testament to the often unforeseen ways in which two wounded souls could find a measure of solace, and perhaps, in the fullness of time, something deeper and more profound, amidst the harsh and often unforgiving realities of the American West.